Welcome to Category Visionaries, the show dedicated to exploring exciting visions for the future from the founders who are on the front lines building it. In each episode, we'll speak with a visionary founder who's building a new category or reimagining an existing one. We'll learn about the problem they solve, how their technology works, and unpack their vision for the future. I'm your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines Media. Now let's dive right into today's episode.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Category Visionaries. Today we're speaking with Justin Leigh, CEO of Workflow Labs, an e-commerce management platform that's raised $3.5 million in funding. Justin, what's going on?
I'm just excited to be here on the podcast. Thanks for having me today, Brett.
Yeah, no problem. Super excited to have you as well. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Let's go back to the founding of the company. I know it's been a couple of years now, so take us back to the founding of the company.
Yeah, it actually goes back a little bit past this one. I won't go all the way to childhood or anything like that. But, the reason this company exists is really the last company I started. So I was at Amazon way back in the day, and somewhere in a meeting, somewhere time around 2008, I was just meeting and someone asked this question that they ask at Amazon, and they just ask it in letters. They say WWJD, which stands for what would Jeff do? And I remember thinking it was such a dumb question because he would quit and go start a company and go do something else. Like he wouldn't be in that meeting right then answering whatever dumb question that we were debating at end there. Anyway, so that became the genesis of my first company, IdeaClick, and I ran that about 14 years and we had about 150 folks. And it got to about $25 million of ARR, which is great and all, but it's a lot of people. So kind of coming out of that experience after transacting that company, I said, basically, how can we do this, but do it with less people and more scale and more automation? So the purpose of Workflow Labs really is to take a human-driven process like managing your Amazon catalog and do it at scale with automation so you can have predictability, better economics, much faster resolution path. So that's the purpose of the company. Yeah, it was a straight up Amazon agency. It was like one of the first of its time where we just helped brands build an Amazon strategy and then execute the Amazon strategy, product, price, promotion, marketing, that sort of things.
What's that been like for you switching from running an agency to running a technology or a software business?
It definitely has a lot of pluses and minuses on every side. However, when I say that, I'm now kind of thinking out loud and saying I would never go back to a people-driven agency. It is just so intense and so all of the time. I think when you think about starting a company, it's a lot easier to start a people-based agency. You get a client and you execute for the client, and then you get another client, then you hire someone, and another client, and hire someone. And you sort of can build a business that way kind of more organically, where, this time with software, you don't get any clients until you have invested pretty heavily in having a product. And then you hope it's the right products and you hope someone buys it. And then you get that first customer and you lose money in your second customer. And you lose money for a while until, you kind of get back up to the cost of what it took to build that product in the first place. So it just feels a lot more risky being on the software kind of product side, but having kind of got through maybe that risk valley of getting the product launched in the marketplace, I definitely wouldn't go back to the agency model if I didn't have to.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of founders have made that transition. They'll probably say the same thing. Once you go to software, I think it's probably very hard to go back to the people-driven, the agency business, but they're tough. What about your market categories? The market category, e-commerce management, is it something more targeted and specific? How do you think about the market category that you're in?
Really, we have a product that spans really everything that humans do in terms of work. We're just applying it to the segment of e-commerce management. So, the premise it's based on is if you have a group of people that are doing a task and that task is neither strategic nor creative, it means a machine should do it. If you are outsourcing it to some foreign country where people are not indoctrinated in your company culture, you should be automating that function. And that's really what we do. Watch what a person does, figure out how to replicate it with software, and then do it at scale. So it applies to many, many different market segments that we'll get to maybe eventually. But right now, it's all about if you have a brand and you have thousands of products on a platform like Amazon, you have to watch those on a daily basis and take all kinds of actions to keep them live and accurate and viable. I would call that e-commerce management, and that's what we're focused on right now.
When it comes to the number of brands that have thousands of products, I don't come from the Amazon world. Like, how many brands are there like that? Are there 100? Are there like 100,000?
Much more than that. There's, somewhere around 300,000 brands that sell just on Amazon US. And if you add sellers, people that are buying and reselling products and that sort of thing, you could probably get closer to 500,000. In our world, we care really about brands that are doing more than $1 million of sales on Amazon. And we start talking about brands like that, that's somewhere in the 75,000 to 100,000 brands in that category.
In terms of marketing and selling to those folks, what's the marketing strategy look like?
right? And this is the GTM podcast. So I think that's like the question of the day. So, I think your go-to-market strategy for any company has to come after your corporate strategy. Like, how long are you going to do what you do? And how fast do you need to get where you're going? And I think speed is probably the most important thing in the world right now when it comes to building products and selling products. To answer your question kind of a roundabout way and then kind of get back to it, I thought about our products. I knew the space pretty well, having ran an agency in the space for about 14 years. And I said, well, if I'm building this company and I need to get to an exit velocity, how long do I have? I'm like, well, I understand the world now. I understand the world probably in 2 years to 3 years, maybe 4 or 5. But after 5 years, like anything could happen. AI could change the world. Everything is evolving so quickly. I thought a lot about swords. Swords were this great product. And for thousands and thousands of years, you could build and sell swords, and that would be great. Now it feels like if you have a great product, that product is going to be great for about 24 months. So you better figure out real fast how you're going to get that product to market, how you're going to sell it, and move on. And reflecting on the agency world, we sold brands one by one. Talk to the brand, meet them at a show, shake their hand, go to trade show, do some marketing, so on and so forth. And it takes a long time, 2 or 3 months probably to close each individual brand. And we need to close 3,000 brands in 2 years, really, here at Workful Labs. That's the mission. 3,000 brands in 2 to 2.5 years. And you're not going to do that selling them one by one. So what we did this time is we said, well, who aggregates these brands for us? Where can we find partners or platforms where all these brands are coming together and we can sign up brands 10s, 20s, 50s, hundreds at a time, if possible. So our go-to-market strategy this time was to, instead of selling directly to brands, is figure out who do those brands work with? What ad agencies do they use? What supply chain providers do they work with? And how do we work with those partners so that we can sign up all of their clients, provide our service to as many of their clients as possible? And to get there fast, how do we be so much better, cheaper, and more efficient than their current solutions that we just sort of win by default? So our go-to-market this time was to find pools of customers and, capture the whole pool as opposed to trying to sell one by one.
And when you look at those partners, are they like agencies like your previous company, or like what types of partners, like how would you put them into buckets? Maybe would be a better way to ask that question.
Yeah. And I can talk about our buckets in particular, but in deciding like what buckets we were going to go after, and I think this is great for any entrepreneur, is to think about what is the world going to be like in a year or 2 years? Who's going to win and what do they need? And the big trend that we saw was that retail media is driving all the advertising dollars onto retailer platforms, ad platforms like Amazon. So brands used to spend on NBC, then they spent on Google. Now they spend directly on Amazon, where you can invest your marketing dollars and see who clicks and who buys and directly attribute sales to the ad dollars that you're spending. And these retailer ad networks are growing incredibly fast. Walmart, Amazon, Target, Kroger, all of them are where the ad dollars are shifting. And where ad dollars shift in the world is where all the eyeballs and focus and everything goes. And so we said, as that shift continues, we support the product. If you're going to advertise the product, you better make sure their title's right, bullets are right, that it's in stock, those sorts of things. So we're a natural tie into that trend. And so we said, who's going to win in this trend? Who wants to win? And so the players that really come to mind are the big ad agencies, Omnicom, Publicis, WPP, so on and so forth down the line. And there's other pools that we went after as well. But, we said, that's where the focus and dollars are going to be. So let's go there and provide a solution that fits perfectly with what those companies are trying to bring to market.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode.
And what's the pitch to the partners? How do you approach that?
We kind of do a push-pull method on that. One of the things that we work very hard on is to engage with brands directly and say, the world is a lot bigger and faster than it used to be. When you RFP for your advertising services, you better make sure that your provider is providing an automated way to keep your products accurate in stock. And that was really successful for us, getting that line item in the RFP that really we're the only provider in town that can satisfy that part of, a request for proposal creates a nice pull in the market for us. And then we could go directly to the ad agencies and say, this is what brands want. This is what's required to service them. And look, here's a product that just bolts on, it's ready to go. It perfectly fits your model. We can seamlessly fit into your delivery to these clients. Why don't we try it? Let's try it with 3 or 4 brands and see how that goes. And so that became really our go-to-market strategy for how we're going to get to our 3,000 brands.
On day one, did you know that was going to be the go-to-market strategy?
Absolutely not. No.
Appreciate the honesty. You could have bullshitted us there.
Oh my gosh, the things we thought on day one. No, we're wrong about like everything. But the nice part about being wrong is as long as you're wrong little and react fast, then everything works out great. It's way better to be wrong early than to have the first few things go right and make you think falsely that the world is just going to go according to your plan. We thought initially so many wrong things, but maybe the thing we thought the most wrong initially is that people were going to care about us. And they didn't. We went to the market and said, hey, you have a 50-person team in India and all they're doing is updating titles. We can make 80% of that labor go away. Like no one cared because they didn't really know what the people in India were doing. They didn't have a problem that needed to be solved. And so despite the fact that we had a tremendous economic value proposition for these brands and folks, they didn't see it that way. We had to say, we'll solve all your problems. We had to create a box that you could put any problem into and you didn't have to care that it's updating titles or it's creating a variation or whatever your problem may be. It had to be in a comprehensive solution was much, much more important than being an automated solution. And until we could sort of hear our customers say that to us and we could react and change, how we were delivered our service, no one wanted to hear the rest of the story. So that's probably the biggest thing we were wrong about. Luckily, I've got an amazing team. We've worked together, for many years in the past. They were able to explain that to me. We pivoted quickly and could kind of change how we were going to market with it.
When you say quickly, how quickly are we talking? Was that like a week decision? Was that over the course of months? What did that look like?
It takes a little while to like talk to someone and get feedback. And then, no one wants to give the real feedback. So you kind of have to work at it. You got to see them in person and get the feedback from the client. So it took us like probably 2 to 3 months to really hear and understand the feedback the market was giving us. And then once we heard that, it was within a month. We had our pivot kind of in place and our first 2 real beta customers signed up and rolling.
When it comes to the brand, how do you think about brand? What do you want the brand to mean?
I think that's a good question. We're such a integrated B2B service that for the most part, I want our brand to be subtle and to not be the brand. I want us to look very acquirable. I want us to, when Omnicom delivers their service to the customer, we want that customer to feel like Omnicom was the driving force that made everything possible and smooth and efficient. Maybe that's the wrong thing. Maybe next year when we have this conversation, I'll tell you that was like the new biggest mistake. But for right now, we felt like our fastest route to market is to be the best partner possible and to let our brand incorporate into our partners' brands as opposed to compete with our partners' brands. And so far, at least, I think that's been successful.
I mean, it makes sense to me. It sounds like a smart decision. Is it white labeled then, or do the customers of your partners, do they ever see workflow labs at all?
We do both. For some clients, they want to provide a fully integrated service and want everything to be branded their way. And transparently, just between you and I and the 100,000 listeners maybe out there now, I think a lot of them are saying, well, if this thing works and gets big enough, maybe I'll acquire it and roll it into the stack. And so they kind of want it to be the seamless, their brand solution. For other providers, it's a nice differentiator in the marketplace. They can be not just an e-commerce agency, they can be an automated, always on, and kind of showcase the capabilities we bring as a reason for why a brand would want to sign up with them. So we do it both ways. Honestly, whatever drives revenue the fastest is what we'll do with our brand.
And where did this 3,000 customer number come from?
That's a great question. It's like you ask questions for a living. Very, very good, thoughtful questions. So I guess thinking about a couple of things I did wrong at the last company at IdeoClick that I wanted to do much differently this time around is if you want everybody in your company to row the boat in the same direction, you have a couple choices. One choice is you can just be a taskmaster and you can stand on the front of the boat and you can yell, pull, or whatever, people on boats do when they want people to oar things. And you can try to control it all and push people and do all that. Or you can be super clear around what your objectives are. Transparent, I don't think is quite the right word, but you can let everyone know what is your mission, what's your objective, and they will start to decide when and where they should row. And you can actually, I think, get the boat goes a lot faster, in my opinion. And so this time around, instead of just saying the world is our ocean, let's get big, I said, we're going to get to 3,000. And that's our goal. And every month, we as a team look at it and say, how many do we have? How close are we to 3,000? Blah, blah, blah. And everyone on the team knows what happens when we get to 3,000. If we can get close to there, that's when liquidity events and things like that start to be on the table. All our folks have equity. And so they act as owners, are clear about our objective. Again, just between you and I don't know if 3,000 is the right number. Maybe we'll go to 10 or 20,000. But I do know that at 3,000, the economics makes sense to the point where the company has lots of options and our employees will get to share in those options.
You mentioned you selling a few times there. What I think is interesting about this conversation is a lot of the founders I talk to, they'll say, we're here for 20 years, or like, we don't even think about the exit. And often I don't think they're being honest. I think everyone has an exit in mind, or I think a lot of people do. I can get it for some businesses. Yeah, maybe that's like your life's work and you're going to spend your entire life doing it. But I think most founders, if they're being honest, like they're thinking about exits, or they probably should be thinking about exits. Has that always been the case? Like, have you always had your eye on an exit, or is that something new based on what happened at your previous company?
New based on the previous company, 100%. The last company, I didn't really understand multiples and what we should think about in terms of what are the metrics we're driving? How is the market going to value us on those metrics? What is a good target to hit and get out? And as a result, you kind of end up like, and I think founders sometimes find themselves in echo chambers with their own ideas. And, when you stand in front of a company and say, wow, we had a great year, here's what we accomplished. You don't answer the questions of, well, how much more are we going to do? And what do I get as an employee if that thing happens? If you're not answering those questions, all those numbers you're putting on your slides, it's just for you and your own ego. And so this time I wanted to be intentional about saying, here's where we're going. Here's what you have. Here's why you should care about what we're going to get there. And we'd engineered, the metrics around what happens when we get there well enough to know that it was going to be something that would work out. So last time I was the echo chamber. This time, intention. Intention and metrics.
This show is brought to you by the Global Talent Co., a marketing leader's best friend in these times of budget cuts and efficient growth. We help marketing leaders find, hire, vet, and manage amazing marketing talent for 50 to 70% less than their US and European counterparts. To book a free consultation, visit globaltalent.co.
What else are you doing differently this time from the previous company? What else comes to mind for maybe the top 2 or 3 other things that you're doing?
Well, I'm older. And so, I don't do long days and hours the way that I used to. And I think that's really good. This time I had the pleasure of being able to hire folks that I'd worked with for a long time, and they're really good and they don't need me. And I get in the way most of the time. So I sort of let them do their jobs and realize my job is not to try to do all of the things, because, you kind of run around as a founder and work real hard to do certain things, but then you kind of drop those and do the next thing. You do that for a while, drop the next thing. You just create messes for everybody in the organization. So stand back, let them do their job, ask them what they need, and try to be able to provide that for them, I think has been one change that I did this time. And then the other thing I focused on was the rule of 3. If you're trying to do more than 3 things, you're doing too many. You probably can only do 1 or 2, but 3 is the max in a quarter. And so just decide what the 3 most important things are and do those. It probably always feels the founder like you need to do more than those 3 things. We have to do them. It doesn't matter if you have to do them. You can only do 3 things. So just start with that. And I think that's been a lot more successful for us.
The rule of 3, isn't that from White Lotus as well? I'm not sure if you're watching that, but I think they're talking about that.
Early? And I'm pretty sure I invented it. I'll have to sue them about that.
How do you approach prioritizing? I have that issue as well. I'll sit there and okay, I know you have to prioritize. And then I end up with a list where it's like 20 things. And I'm like, I swear, all of these things are very important. I'm trying to prioritize. What's your approach to actually doing it?
Yeah. Again, let the people do the things because they're better. You could say that I let people think founders should let people do things because they're lazy, but that's not true. Founders should let other people do things because those people are better at those things than you are. And so what we do once a quarter at Workflow Labs is we have a company meeting where I invite everybody. It doesn't matter who you are. Well, we're small. There's only 10 folks. So everybody comes and we just ask the question of, what do you guys think we need to accomplish this quarter? And just make a big, long list. And then we start having kind of a sweet 16 of these ideas. Between these 2 things, what's the most important? The loser goes, loser fails. And we vote on them. Everyone has to vote. Everyone has to win or lose until the end. There's just 3 things. And we know that they're the most important 3.
What are the top 3 for this quarter? Can you share?
The top 3 for this quarter, we're actually just wrapping up our last few. The top 3 for this quarter is we had to get to 80% automation. So of the tasks in our system, 80% had to be accomplished without a human touching them. And we got to 82. It dropped briefly down to 78. We're going to count it. We needed to cross $100,000 a month of recurring revenue. last number was 97. So, just a breath away. And our third most important thing, this is one where I kind of put my finger on the scale, but we need to do 3 team events in the quarter. And we'll probably have that as an objective every quarter. And they're probably things that a board might say are more important or something else. But I find that to maybe the most important objective in a virtual world, where things change quick, we need to make decisions. Having that in-person connectivity is just critical. So, those are the 3 for the quarter.
What about fundraising lessons? So as I mentioned there in the intro, 3.5 million raised to date. What have you learned about fundraising throughout this journey?
Fundraising is best done when you don't need any money. That's what I've learned. It's way better to raise money when you don't need it. I think as a founder, you should talk to other founders that have raised money, because there's 3 or 4 main different ways to think about how much capital you're going to put into a company at any given time. And each of those strategies has pros and cons. And if they haven't done it before, they're going to be surprised by all the pros and cons. I know I was. So I guess for me, the important part this time around was to only raise just barely more capital than you need, because you don't know if it's going to be successful or not. And if you give away too much to the company, you're going to have more voices in the room that you have to answer to, and you're going to be less great at deciding how to spend the money. So I think kind of from start to finish, if I was just to say Justin's best way to raise funds is first get in a little bit of capital from a convertible note, just enough to prove that the market cares about your product, and then do a follow-on raise that gives you just enough money to get that product to market and prove that it's going to grow, and then put in some growth, and then maybe do a third round that's kind of like, how do I now get this thing to profitability and beyond? It'd be my best strategy. And hopefully through that process, if you're a founder, you have somewhere close to 50% of the company left. And if you accomplish all that, I think that's a great fundraising strategy. I think most folks probably do the raise 2 on a $5 million valuation. You're giving away massive chunk of the company. Maybe you have a partner. That's not starting a company. That's taking a job. Now you work for somebody, and you're going to really struggle to maintain the growth cycle necessary to keep raising. And at the end, you'll need a massive outcome because the percentage of the company is so small.
It's been crazy how many conversations I've had with founders who've had that realization that you can raise a bunch of money, but at the end of the day, if you have a board that you report to, you don't have control of the company, it is just a job. It's a cool job, but it's still a job at the end of the day.
Yeah. And I think maybe the most important part of the first part of a company is not really the money or the product, it's the team. And everyone has to care and put their mind and their soul into this thing and move it forward. They have to express their ideas, be heard. That's what allows the company to grow fast and get from nothing to something that the world cares about. And that's really hard to do if you have really loud money in the room, or you raise a bunch of capital. Now you're putting in kind of senior execs that are used to managing that kind of money into a company. It's a different set of people that are good at creating ideas and getting them off the ground to people that are good at scaling companies and deploying large sums of capital. So bringing those people in such an important inflection point, you better be pretty solid before you do it.
Final question for you now, since we're almost up on time. Let's zoom out 3 to 5 years into the future. What's the big picture vision look like here?
For Workflow Lab?
Yes.
Yeah, I think one of a couple of things will happen. Either we grow really well and one of our partners say, this is an integral part of our service, and let's fully integrate you and make an acquisition of Workflow Lab. I think that would be a great fine outcome. All the employees get paid. Great. Or, we get far enough along that we say, this idea of freeing humanity from mundanity. Humans shouldn't do repetitive tasks that don't require creativity. Maybe this idea is big enough and we can go beyond our space and free humanity everywhere from boring tasks. And if we could get there, then maybe you do the big raise and you kind of pivot the company and go for that great big thing. And I think the important moment there is the team's really going to change. We've been bringing different folks, and maybe the people who got us here want to continue, or maybe they don't. Maybe they're ready to kind of transition to something else. So, I see us kind of getting to that point where we've been really successful in this marketplace. And then we get a chance to say, who are we? Are we a big idea that wants to go far? Or are we a great service that should be integrated? And maybe it will require a different leader when that happens. That's another kind of learning I had from last time. I think founders hold on to the rein a little bit too hard a lot of the time. And the fact that you were able to do something successfully doesn't mean you're the right person to do the next phase successfully. And just because you're not running the company doesn't mean you're not valuable, and it can't be a great, fun experience. So, I think I have a much broader perspective on what my role in this company will be in the long term based on what we're able to accomplish.
Amazing, man. I love it. I really love this conversation. I think it's really packed full of insights that our audience is going to find super valuable. So we'll be rooting for your success and hope to have you back on in another year or two just to talk about everything that you've accomplished. Maybe when you have the 3,000th customer, we can do a big interview and talk about everything that you learned to make that happen.
That'd be great. And maybe we'll learn that that was 100% the wrong idea and that 3,000 is not the number. Who knows? And I'm sure there'll be lots of great learnings. And I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you and your audience.
Of course. And one final thing, if founders who are listening and just want to keep up with you as you build and execute on this vision, where should we send them? Where should they go?
Well, workflowlabs.net is our website. And, hit me up on LinkedIn, Justin Leigh on LinkedIn, and I would be happy to chat with anyone who's on that entrepreneurial journey.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Brett.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.